Hello, I'm Sean Lim, and my teammate is Isaac Tam, and today we'll be presenting our work for the Hack the Bay 2020 Hackathon. Our main objective with our model was to analyze nitrogen and phosphorus pollution levels in the HUCs in Pennsylvania and Maryland using novel analytic methods. We chose to focus on nitrogen and phosphorus levels as they are one of the predominant wide-reaching types of nutrient pollution with widespread detrimental impacts on biodiversity. Also, nitrogen and phosphorus readings were the most consistently available over most HUCs. Our aim with our model was to study underlying factors affecting nitrogen and phosphorus levels across HUCs, which we achieved by using multiple linear regression as well as XGBoost to show factors and variable importance. Next, we also attempted to predict future nitrogen and phosphorus levels for individual HUCs, which we did by using time series Sarimax modeling to uncover location-specific seasonal trends.
So let's talk about how we process and analyze the data. So the data that was given to us is spatial and temporal data, which are really complex. So to process it better, we use an interactive visualization through Python Dash in order to let us visualize spatial and temporal data. We can look at the spatial relationships between point sources of pollution and also the stations that collect the pollution data. And over here, for the points of pollution, you can see the temporal aspect of how pollution levels change over time. And these allow us to gain further insights into the relationships between pollutions and different factors in Chesapeake Bay.
We then made some data transformations to obtain variables to use as inputs for our regression models. The first data point that we considered was upstream and downstream HUCs. We did this by representing HUC dependencies as a directed acyclic graph using Python's network package, and this allowed us to sum point sources and pollution loads from all ancestor HUC sources to a particular node. We then proceeded to collect land use data from high-resolution land use data downloaded from USGS. We passed land use images through an algorithm that calculated color percentages based on the pixels of the image using OpenCV. And we then layered raster data and HUC boundary data on QGIS to calculate land use percentages around particular HUC data points. The final data point we collected was on population density, as we found that population density was a predominant cause of non-point source pollution. We calculated population density by using county-level annual population estimates over a period of time and divided this by land area data.
Now on to our results. The first thing we try is linear regression, test each predictor variable for statistical significance. And looking at the results, we see that nearly every predictor variable is statistically significant. That means they contribute some bit to determining the pollution levels for both nitrogen and pollution. And interestingly, we see that for nitrogen, we see that in the winter months, they tend to be higher, while phosphorus in the summer months, the pollution tends to be higher. And looking at the results for the 8 HUCs that we ran the land use regressions, we see that for nitrogen, areas with more roads seem to be higher, possibly due to greater surface runoff from upstream agricultural pollution. But in contrast, agricultural areas have higher phosphorus pollution. And this is interesting because it corroborates the literature review that we did. Next, we ran a nonlinear machine learning model, which is called XGBoost, which allows to capture higher order relationships and the relative variable importances of the different factors. And for nitrogen, we see that the factors of salinity, phosphorus levels, location, and seasonal factors are the most important features. And on the right-hand side, we see partial dependence plots, which basically varies the individual factors and sees how the nitrogen pollution changes. And we see that winter months seem to have higher nitrogen pollution, lower salinity levels seem to have higher nitrogen pollution, and also areas with higher longitude that's correlated with more urban areas. And we see that population density, number of point sources do not seem to really affect nitrogen pollution. And on the other hand, when we look at phosphorus, we see interesting differences from nitrogen in the seasonal and locational factors. For variable importance, we see that nitrogen pollution, location, and water temperature and density are the most important factors. And looking at the partial dependence plots, we see that higher phosphorus occurs during the summer months with higher water temperatures, and also more concentrated in the west, which areas that have more farmland. So the last thing we did was we created a predictive model, time series model called Sarimax, which allows us to capture the trend and seasonal effects and extrapolate that to predict future pollutant trends. And we chose a ARMA22 model through model selection and minimizing the BIC. We split it into the training and test data and fit the model on the training data. And with the fitted model, we predicted the total nitrogen levels on the test data. So then we see that the predictions are generally quite accurate. And we see that the mean squared error is pretty low. And interestingly, even if you do not add exogenous predictors, we see that the seasonal model is frankly enough to capture most of the relationship as seen in orange. So this procedure can be repeated for all other 800 points in the dataset, and it will allow people for every location to kind of predict what the pollution levels will be years into the future.